What happens when a most feared human warrior in the galaxy has been silent for 3 years, bound by alien chains that suppress his very soul? What happens when that silence is finally broken not by his captor's torture, but by a single alien voice calling his name with reverence instead of fear? They call him the Reaper. Across 1,000 worlds, his name is whispered in the dark corners of space stations and echoed in the war rooms of alien empires. Some say he single-handedly turned the tide of the Terran-Vorthan War. Others claim he's just a myth, a ghost story told to frighten alien children. But Marcus Reaper Kane is very real, and he's been trapped in the deepest prison of the Zephyrian Empire for 3 long years. Stripped of his voice by neural suppressors, bound by chains that drain his strength, he's become a silent shadow of the legend he once was. Until today, until a young alien guard speaks his name not with hatred, but with something far more dangerous: hope. What follows will shake the foundations of an empire and remind the galaxy why humans are the most feared species among the stars. Because when you cage a Reaper, you don't destroy him. You just make him quiet until the harvest begins. The neural suppressor hummed against Marcus Kane's skull like a dying insect. 3 years, 7 months, and 16 days since they'd grafted the cursed thing to his brain stem. 3 years since he'd spoken a word, felt an emotion, or remembered what it meant to be human rather than just breathing meat in chains. The cell measured 12 feet by 8 feet by 7 feet high. Marcus knew because he'd counted the paces for the first year until even that small act of rebellion felt pointless. The walls were smooth metal, polished to a mirror shine that reflected his hollow eyes back at him. Sometimes he wondered if that was deliberate, a reminder of what he'd become, what he'd lost. The chains that bound his wrists and ankles were made from Zephyrian battle steel, the same metal they used for their warship hulls. Each link weighed 40 pounds. The full set kept him anchored to the center of the cell, allowing just enough movement to lie down or sit up but never to reach the walls, never to touch anything that might remind him of the outside universe. Marcus had once been 6 feet 4 inches of trained muscle and focused rage. Now he was something closer to a scarecrow, all sharp angles and hollow spaces where strength used to live. His black hair had grown past his shoulders, matted and unkempt. His beard reached his chest in tangled knots. The Zephyrians fed him just enough to keep his heart beating and his brain functioning. Nothing more. They called him Prisoner Designation ZX 7749. But across the galaxy, whispered in 1,000 different languages on 1,000,000 different worlds, his real name still carried weight. Marcus Reaper Kane, the human who'd ended the siege of Proxima Station by walking alone into a Vorthan Nest ship and emerging 6 hours later as the only living thing aboard. The soldier who'd held the Kepler Gap for 17 days against impossible odds, buying time for civilian evacuations with nothing but his rifle and a will that refused to break. The man who'd stared down a Zephyrian battle fleet at New Hokkaido and made them blink first. All of that felt like another lifetime now. Another person who'd worn his skin. The morning routine never varied. At 0600 ship time, the cell would fill with harsh white light. Marcus would wake if he'd managed to sleep, which was rare. The neural suppressor made sleep elusive, keeping his brain just active enough to process the endless stream of sensory-dampening signals it fed into his nervous system. At 0630, a nutrition paste would appear through the slot in the door. Gray sludge that tasted like recycled cardboard and contained exactly the minimum calories needed to keep a human male of his approximate age and weight alive. Marcus would eat it because the alternative was death, and somewhere deep in the parts of his mind the suppressor couldn't reach, he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. At 0800, they would come. Today felt different, though Marcus couldn't say why. Maybe it was the slight vibration in the ship's hull that suggested they were dropping out of hyperspace. Maybe it was the way the artificial gravity seemed a hair lighter than usual, indicating course corrections. Or maybe it was just the desperate hope of a man who'd been buried alive for 3 years, grasping at any variation in the routine that kept him sane. The footsteps in the corridor were wrong. Marcus lifted his head from where it had been resting against his knees. The neural suppressor prevented him from feeling curiosity or anticipation, but it couldn't stop his trained instincts from cataloging details. 2 sets of boots, not the usual 3. Lighter footfalls from the second person, suggesting either a smaller individual or different species entirely. The rhythm was off too, hesitant where it should be confident. The door's lock mechanism hissed as it cycled through its security protocols. Multiple redundant systems, each one designed to keep Earth's most dangerous soldier exactly where the Zephyrian Empire wanted him. The door slid open. Captain Vexhar stood in the doorway like always, his crimson uniform immaculate despite the early hour. He was tall even for a Zephyrian, nearly 7 feet of pale blue skin stretched over a frame that managed to be both elegant and intimidating. His eyes were the color of Arctic ice, and they'd never shown Marcus anything but cold professional disdain. Behind him stood someone Marcus had never seen before. A young Zephyrian female, maybe 20 in human years if Marcus was reading the alien physiology correctly. Her skin was the pale, silver blue of her species, but with undertones that suggested she was from one of the outer colonies rather than the core worlds. Her uniform bore the insignia of a junior security officer, fresh out of whatever academies the Zephyrians used to train their military. But it was her eyes that caught Marcus's attention. Where Captain Vexhar's gaze was ice, hers burned with something that looked almost like recognition. Prisoner X, 7749, Captain Vexhar announced in the clipped, formal tones of someone reading from a script he'd memorized years ago. Today you will be transferred to a new containment facility. Compliance is expected. Resistance will be met with neural punishment protocols. The threat was meaningless. The suppressor made resistance impossible on anything but the most basic physical level, and Marcus had learned long ago that even minor defiance brought waves of agony that could last for days. His body would obey because his brain had no choice in the matter. The young officer stepped forward with the portable restraint controls. This was always the most dangerous part for the guards, the moment when they had to get close enough to adjust his chains, when 3 years of suppressed rage might find an outlet in pure animal reflex. But as she knelt beside him to unlock the cell anchor points, she did something that had never happened before. She whispered, "Marcus Kane." His name, his real name, spoken so quietly that the monitoring systems likely wouldn't pick it up. Spoken not with the cold professionalism of his captors or the fear he'd grown used to seeing in alien eyes. Spoken with respect. The suppressor immediately flooded his nervous system with dampening signals, trying to prevent the emotional response it detected building in his brain. But for just a moment, one brief, shining moment, Marcus felt something stir in the depths of his chest. Hope. The young officer's hands trembled slightly as she worked at the restraint controls. Up close, Marcus could see that her eyes weren't just burning with recognition. They were burning with anger. Not at him, but for him. She knew who he was. Not prisoner ZX, 7749, but Marcus Kane, the Reaper. And she knew what had been done to him. Move efficiently, Officer Zura. Captain Vexhar barked from the doorway. We have a schedule to maintain. Zara. Now he had a name to go with the face. Zara, who'd spoken his name like a prayer instead of curse. The restraints shifted from the cell anchor to portable units that would allow him to walk while keeping him securely bound. Zara's movements were quick and professional, but Marcus caught the way her fingers lingered for just a moment when she checked the connections. The way she made sure the metal wasn't sitting quite tight enough to cut off circulation. Small kindnesses that probably meant nothing, or everything. As they led him through the corridors of what he now realized was a prison transport ship, Marcus tried to piece together what was happening. The transfer itself wasn't unusual. He'd been moved 4 times in 3 years, always to more secure facilities as his legend grew despite his captivity. But something about this felt different. The crew they passed seemed nervous. Not the usual wariness that came with transporting dangerous prisoners, but genuine anxiety. He caught fragments of conversations in rapid Zephyrian that his translator implant couldn't quite process, but the tone was unmistakable. Something had them scared. The ship's bridge was a study in controlled chaos. Officers bent over displays showing tactical readouts and hyperspace navigation data. The captain, an elderly Zephyrian with scars that spoke of actual combat experience, looked up as they entered. Prisoners X, 7749, reporting for transfer as ordered, Captain Vexar announced. The bridge captain's ice-blue eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that might have been curiosity if Zephyrians were capable of such human emotions. "So you're the famous Reaper," he said in accented but clear English. "You look smaller than I expected." Marcus said nothing because he couldn't. The suppressor wouldn't let him. 3 years of imprisonment will do that to a man, Officer Zura said quietly, and Marcus felt another flicker of surprise. She was speaking up for him, risking discipline to state an uncomfortable truth. The bridge captain's expression darkened. "You forget your place, officer. The prisoner is a war criminal responsible for the deaths of thousands of our people. His treatment is exactly what he deserves." "Is it?" The voice came from behind them, and everyone on the bridge turned. Another Zephyrian had entered, but this one wore robes instead of a military uniform. Gray fabric marked with symbols that Marcus didn't recognize, but which caused visible reactions among the crew. Fear mostly, and respect. A civilian authority of some kind, and someone with power that transcended military rank. "Counselor Theklar," the bridge captain said, his voice suddenly much more formal. "I was not aware you were aboard." "Emergency session of the High Council," the newcomer replied, his ancient eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "We received disturbing intelligence about Terran fleet movements in the outer sectors. It seems your famous prisoner's legend continues to inspire resistance among his people." Marcus felt another surge from the suppressor as his brain tried to process that information. Human resistance. His people still fighting, still believing in what he'd stood for. Which raises interesting questions, Counselor Theklar continued, moving closer with the careful gait of someone who'd seen too many wars. About whether keeping Marcus Kane alive serves our interests or threatens them. The bridge went silent except for the quiet hum of ship systems. Marcus could feel the tension radiating from everyone present, but especially from Officer Zara. Her jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "The High Council will convene to discuss the prisoner's future," the counselor said finally. "Until then, he remains in maximum security containment." As they led him to what would presumably be another cell in another prison, Marcus found himself thinking about Officer Zara's trembling hands and burning eyes. About the way she'd spoken his name like it meant something. About the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he'd thought. The neural suppressor hummed against his skull, working overtime to keep hope from taking root in his mind. But hope, Marcus was beginning to remember, was a very human thing. And humans were notoriously difficult to kill, even when you try to bury them alive for 3 years. The new cell was identical to the old one, except for the view. Instead of blank metal walls, one side was transparent aluminum looking out into the vast emptiness of space. Marcus could see stars wheeling slowly past as the ship continued its journey to whatever destination awaited him. As Officer Zara made the final adjustments to his restraints, she leaned close enough that her breath touched his ear. "The galaxy remembers," she whispered, so quietly that even Marcus almost missed it. "And some of us never forgot." Then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with chains and hope and the infinite darkness between the stars. For the first time in 3 years, 7 months, and 16 days, the Reaper began to plan. The High Council chambers of the Zephyrian Empire were carved from a single massive asteroid, hollowed out and converted into a monument to bureaucratic power. The curved walls displayed the conquered worlds of the Empire in glowing holographic detail. Hundreds of systems, thousands of planets, billions of subjugated beings all bowing to Zephyrian authority. Marcus Kane sat in the defendant's chair at the center of it all, chains weighing him down like anchors. The neural suppressor had been upgraded for this appearance, its hum now a constant pressure behind his eyes that made thinking feel like swimming through liquid concrete. They wanted him passive, broken, a symbol of defeated humanity rather than a reminder of what humans could do when pushed too far. Around him, 12 of the most powerful Zephyrians in the galaxy debated his fate in voices that carried the weight of eons. They spoke in formal High Zephyrian, their words flowing like ice water over ancient stones, but Marcus's implant translated enough for him to follow the general discussion. They were afraid of him, not of what he was now. 3 years of imprisonment had reduced him to a shadow of his former self. They were afraid of what he represented. The idea that a single human could become a symbol powerful enough to inspire resistance across dozens of worlds. The intelligence reports are clear. Counselor Vecthera was saying, her pale hands gesturing toward holographic displays that showed fleet movements and communication intercepts. 17 separate human resistance cells have adopted Reaper as their operational codename. The Meridian Liberation Front calls their flagship the Kane's Vengeance. Even on worlds we've held for decades, his name appears in underground transmissions. Propaganda. Dismissed Counselor Morgeth, the Empire's military strategist. Humans cling to myths when reality becomes too harsh to accept. Kane is a broken prisoner, nothing more. A broken prisoner whose continued existence fuels those myths, Counselor Theklar countered. He was the one who'd appeared on the bridge, Marcus remembered. Ancient even by Zephyrian standards, with scars that spoke of wars fought before humanity had even developed spaceflight. The question before us is simple. Does Marcus Kane serve our purposes better alive or dead? Marcus tried to listen while simultaneously working at the mental exercises that kept his mind sharp despite the suppressor's influence. Count the counselor's breathing patterns. Catalog the security positions. Note the subtle power dynamics and how they position themselves relative to each other. Stay ready, even when readiness seemed impossible. If we execute him publicly, Counselor Vecthera continued, we risk creating a martyr. Humans have an unfortunate tendency to Leonize their dead heroes. And if we keep him alive, we provide a focal point for rescue attempts, Morgeth shot back. Already we've detected 3 separate infiltration attempts on our prison facilities. Crude efforts, but they're learning. That was interesting. Marcus had wondered why he'd been transferred so many times. Each move had been to facilities with progressively better security, which suggested his people weren't just sitting around accepting his capture. They were trying to get him back. The thought sent warmth spreading through his chest before the neural suppressor clamped down with a wave of chemical dampening. The device couldn't read his thoughts directly, but it monitored his emotional responses and worked to flatten anything that might lead to hope or determination. There is a third option, said a voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned toward the speaker. Marcus had to crane his neck against his restraints to see her clearly. Officer Zara stood at attention near the chamber's entrance, her junior uniform looking woefully out of place among the ceremonial robes and formal dress uniforms of the council. Her face was composed, professional, but Marcus could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. You forget yourself, officer, Counselor Theklar said coldly. This is not a forum for junior personnel. With respect, Counselor, I was assigned to the prisoner security detail specifically because of my research into human psychology and resistance patterns, Zara replied. Her voice was steady, but Marcus caught the slight tremor that suggested she was terrified. I believe I have insights relevant to this discussion. The council exchanged glances. Bureaucrats, Marcus thought. Even alien ones couldn't resist the possibility that they might be missing some crucial piece of information. Speak, Theklar commanded, but be brief. Zara stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished stone floor. The prisoner's value isn't in what he is now, but in what he represents to both sides of this conflict. To humans, he's proof that their species can stand against us. To our own people, he's a reminder that we're not invincible. Your point, officer? My point is that we've been thinking about this incorrectly. The question isn't whether Marcus Kane lives or dies. The question is how we control the narrative around either outcome. Marcus found himself studying Zara more carefully. When she'd whispered his name in the cell, he'd assumed she was just a sympathetic guard. But, listening to her now, he was beginning to suspect there was much more going on. Elaborate, Counselor Vectoros said, her interest clearly piqued. If we execute him, we need to do it in a way that demonstrates our power while simultaneously destroying his legend. A public trial where he confesses to war crimes. A slow degradation that shows his human frailties. Make him a cautionary tale rather than a martyr. Several counselors nodded thoughtfully. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. If they went that route, the neural suppressor could force him to say anything they wanted. His own voice could be used to destroy everything he'd fought for. And if we keep him alive? Morgoth asked. We use him as bait, Zara said without hesitation. His people will never stop trying to rescue him. Every attempt gives us intelligence about human resistance capabilities and network structures. We learn who their leaders are, how they organize, what their weaknesses are. Eventually, we capture them all. The logic was sound, Marcus had to admit. Coldly practical in the way that successful oppressors always were. Use his survival as a weapon against his own people. But there was something in Zara's eyes as she spoke that didn't match her words. A flicker of something that might have been regret, determination, or is he just seeing what he wanted to see? Interesting proposal, Counselor Theklar mused. But it assumes we can maintain control over the prisoner indefinitely. Marcus Kane didn't earn his reputation by accepting defeat. The neural suppressor makes escape impossible, Zara replied. And even if it didn't, where would he go? We're in the heart of the Empire, surrounded by loyal worlds and patrolling fleets. He has no allies here, no resources, no way to communicate with the outside universe. True enough, Vectoros said, but humans are creative when cornered. Their history is full of impossible escapes and last-minute reversals. Which is why, Zara continued, I recommend a modification to current containment protocols. The chamber fell silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. I propose we allow the prisoner limited communication privileges. Monitored, controlled access to information about the outside universe. Let him see intelligence reports about human defeats. Show him images of conquered Earth colonies. Make him watch as his legend fades and his people lose hope. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not just physical imprisonment, but psychological torture designed to break his spirit completely. Marcus felt the neural suppressor working overtime as emotions threatened to surge past its control mechanisms. Break his mind rather than his body, Theklar said slowly. Elegant. And reversible, should we choose to parade him as a broken example later. The intelligence value alone justifies the risk, Morgoth added. If he breaks completely, we might even extract strategic information about human fleet dispositions and resistance leadership. They were warming to the idea, Marcus could see, the prospect of not just defeating the Reaper, but turning him into a weapon against his own people. Very well, Counselor Theklar declared. Officer Zura, you will oversee the implementation of this new containment protocol. The prisoner will be transferred to Facility 7 on Kethmoran Prime. You have full authority to adjust his conditions as needed for maximum psychological impact. Understood, Counselor, Zara replied with a crisp salute. As the council began discussing logistics and timelines, Marcus found himself studying the young Zephyrian officer who'd just volunteered to break him. There was something about her expression, something in the way she held herself, that didn't quite fit. Nobody achieved the rank of officer in the Zephyrian military by being soft. Their training was notoriously brutal, designed to eliminate any trace of sympathy or hesitation. Yet Zara had shown him kindness, however small, and now she was volunteering to personally oversee his psychological destruction. Either she was a consummate actress playing a role beyond Marcus's ability to detect, or there was a game being played here that he didn't understand yet. As they led him from the chamber back to his temporary cell, Marcus caught Zara's eye for just a moment. She gave no sign of recognition, no hint of the whispered words they'd shared. But he'd been a soldier long enough to recognize operational security when he saw it. The transport to Keth Moran Prime took 6 days. Marcus spent them in a new cell aboard a different ship, this one with improved suppressor technology that made even basic thinking an effort. They fed him better food, gave him access to a small hygiene station, even provided a thin mattress for sleeping. Preparing him for the long game, he realized you couldn't break someone psychologically if they were already broken physically. They needed him functional enough to understand what was being taken from him. Officer Zara appeared twice during the journey, always with other guards, always maintaining professional distance. But on the second visit, as she checked his restraint settings, she did something interesting. She made an error. Nothing obvious, nothing that would trigger the cell's monitoring systems. But the left ankle restraint was calibrated just slightly loose, maybe a quarter-inch of extra room. Not enough to slip free, but enough to improve circulation. Enough to be more comfortable. Mistakes like that didn't happen in Zephyrian military operations, which meant it wasn't a mistake, which meant Officer Zara was either incompetent, unlikely given her rapid promotion to overseeing a maximum security prisoner, or she was deliberately helping him in ways too small to be detected. The question was why. Keth Moran Prime appeared in the ship's viewports as a massive sphere of gray and blue, its surface marked by the geometric patterns of extensive urban development. This was one of the Empire's core worlds, heavily fortified and completely loyal to the ruling council. If Zara was planning some kind of rescue operation, she'd chosen possibly the worst location in the galaxy to attempt it. Unless that wasn't what she was planning at all. Facility 7 turned out to be an entire complex built into a mountainside, its levels extending deep underground through natural caverns and artificial excavations. The architecture was designed for psychological impact as much as security. Oppressive corridors that made visitors feel small, lighting that cast harsh shadows, the constant sound of heavy machinery that suggested vast, impersonal power. Marcus's new cell was luxurious compared to his previous accommodations. Actual furniture instead of bare floor. A viewing screen that could display entertainment programs or news feeds. Even a small library of books, human classics, he noted with surprise. Comfortable? Zara asked as she completed the intake procedures. They were alone for the first time since the council chambers, the other guards having withdrawn to monitoring stations. Marcus tried to speak, forgetting for a moment about the neural suppressor. The words died in his throat, replaced by the familiar sensation of electrical interference in his vocal cords. The suppressor will be modified tomorrow, Zara continued conversationally. Partial vocal restoration for the psychological conditioning program. You'll be able to speak, but only when we want you to. She moved around the cell, adjusting settings on various devices, her movements efficient and professional. But when she reached the wall-mounted data terminal, her fingers lingered for just a moment longer than necessary on the interface. Programming something? Or just checking the existing setup? I want you to understand something, Marcus, she said quietly, using his name again despite the risk. What happens next is going to be difficult. You're going to see things and hear things that will make you question everything you've fought for. She turned to face him directly, her pale blue eyes intense in the cell's artificial lighting. But remember this, sometimes the only way to win is to appear to lose completely. Then, she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with cryptic words and the growing certainty that Officer Zara was playing a much deeper game than anyone suspected. The neural suppressor hummed against his skull, trying to prevent him from feeling hope or curiosity about what was coming next. It was failing. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Kane allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his imprisonment was about to become something else entirely. Outside his cell window, the lights of Keth Moran Prime sprawled across the planet's surface like a glowing web. Somewhere out there, human resistance cells were planning and fighting and refusing to surrender. Somewhere out there, his legend lived on. And somewhere much closer, a young Zephyrian officer was preparing to either destroy him completely or give him the tools to destroy them instead. Marcus settled back to wait and see which it would be. The voice returned to Marcus Kane, like a tide rushing back to shore. One moment, the neural suppressor was its usual constant presence, dampening his thoughts and crushing any attempt at vocalization. The next, something shifted in its programming, and suddenly he could feel words forming in his throat again. Test sequence initiated. Zara announced from her position at the control console. Prisoner will demonstrate vocal capability. Marcus opened his mouth experimentally. Air moved past his vocal cords without interference for the first time in almost 4 years. The sensation was so foreign it felt like discovering a new organ. The word emerged as barely a whisper, rough and cracked from disuse. I can speak normally, Zara commanded in the clinical tone she used whenever other personnel might be monitoring. State your designation. Marcus cleared his throat, the sound echoing strangely in the cell. Prisoner designation Zax, 7749. Correct. Now state your previous military identification. This was the test, he realized. Whether the partial restoration would allow him to say things the Zephyrians didn't want to hear. Marcus Kane, Colonel, Terran Defense Forces, service number. The words flowed easily until he reached his serial number. Then, his voice simply stopped working. The suppressor was still active, still controlling what he could and couldn't say. Selective restoration. They wanted him to be able to speak, but only about approved topics. Excellent, Zara noted, making marks on her datapad. The psychological conditioning program can begin immediately. Over the following days, Marcus learned the true scope of what they planned for him. The cell's viewing screen came alive with carefully curated content designed to break his spirit through information rather than torture. Battle reports showing human defeats. Intercepted transmissions revealing resistance cells being crushed. Propaganda footage of Earth colonies adapting peacefully to Zephyrian rule. The cruelest touch was that much of it appeared to be genuine. Marcus watched fleet engagement recordings that showed human ships being systematically destroyed by superior Zephyrian technology. He saw resistance leaders being captured or killed, their organizations crumbling as they lost their supply lines and safe havens. Most painful of all, he watched interviews with human civilians who spoke about accepting their new reality under alien rule. The war is over, one elderly man said into the camera, his Earth accent thick with exhaustion. Our boys fought bravely, but fighting just brings more suffering now. It's time to make peace. The suppressor prevented Marcus from feeling the full emotional impact, but it couldn't stop him from intellectually processing what he saw. If the intelligence was accurate, then the human resistance was collapsing. His capture hadn't just removed one soldier from the war. It had removed the symbol that kept hope alive. Devastating, isn't it? Zara commented during one of her daily visits. She'd taken to spending longer periods in his cell, ostensibly monitoring his psychological responses, but actually engaging in careful conversations that probed the edges of what the suppressor would allow. Is it accurate? Marcus asked. The question came out flat, emotionless, filtered through the neural interface. Intelligence reports don't lie, Zara replied, but something in her tone suggested layers beneath the words. Your people are learning to adapt to new realities. She moved to adjust something on the data terminal, her back to the cell's monitoring cameras. As she worked, her fingers moved in what looked like random patterns across the interface. But Marcus had been a special operations soldier before becoming the Reaper. He recognized tactical hand signals when he saw them. The message was simple, not real. False intelligence. Stay strong. His blood nearly froze before training took over. Show no reaction. Process the information without giving any external sign that he'd received it. The suppressor would detect emotional spikes, but it couldn't read his thoughts directly. The intelligence was fabricated. The defeats, the collapsed resistance, the surrendering civilians, some or all of it was propaganda designed to break his will. Which meant the human resistance was still fighting. Which meant Zara was definitely not what she appeared to be. Your vital signs are elevated, she noted aloud, frowning at her scanner readings. The information is having the intended psychological impact. But her eyes, when they met his briefly, carried a different message entirely. Be careful. They're watching. That night, Marcus lay on his narrow cot staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together what was really happening. Zara was clearly working against her own people's interests, but why? And how deep did her deception go? The most obvious answer was that she was a human agent who'd somehow infiltrated the Zephyrian military. But that seemed impossible. Their physical differences were too pronounced for any kind of disguise to work long-term. DNA scans, biometric monitoring, the casual physical interactions of military life. A human couldn't maintain that kind of cover for years, unless she wasn't human. The second possibility was that she was genuinely Zephyrian, but working for the Resistance anyway. A defector, motivated by ideology or some personal grievance against the Empire. That was more plausible, but raised other questions about how she'd maintained her cover while climbing the ranks. The third possibility was the one that made Marcus's tactical instincts scream warnings. Zara was exactly what she appeared to be, and this was all an elaborate psychological operation designed to give him false hope before crushing it completely. Make him think he had an ally. Let him plan and scheme and believe rescue is possible. Then reveal it was all theater designed to break him more thoroughly than simple imprisonment ever could. But if that were true, why use hand signals to communicate? Why take the risk of discovery when they could achieve the same psychological effect through purely verbal manipulation? The questions multiplied faster than answers, creating a maze of possibilities and counter-possibilities that would have been exhausting even without the neural suppressor's constant interference. 3 days later, Zara arrived with new equipment. Enhanced interrogation protocols, she announced as she wheeled a sophisticated-looking device into the cell. The Council wants deeper intelligence about Resistance leadership and fleet dispositions. The machine looked like a cross between a medical scanner and a torture device, all sleek surfaces and ominous probe attachments. Marcus recognized some of the components from technical briefings: neural mapping arrays, synaptic stimulators, memory extraction nodes. They were going to try to read his mind directly. This will be uncomfortable, Zara said as she began setting up the equipment. But the suppressor will prevent you from feeling the full pain response. She worked with practiced efficiency, calibrating sensors, and running diagnostic routines. But when she activated the privacy field generator, supposedly to prevent classified intelligence from being overheard by lower clearance personnel, her entire demeanor changed. "Listen carefully," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the sound-dampened field. "The memory extraction is real, but I've modified the protocols. Instead of pulling information out, we're going to push something in." Marcus stared at her, unable to vocalize his confusion thanks to the suppressor's restrictions on unauthorized conversation. "I'm going to upload data directly to your neural pathways," Zara continued rapidly. "Resistance communications, fleet positions, extraction routes. Information you'll need when the time comes." When the time comes for what? Marcus wanted to ask, but could only listen. "The process will look exactly like enhanced interrogation to any external monitoring. You'll appear to be in distress, potentially revealing classified information under duress. But what's actually happening is that you're receiving an intelligence briefing that would take weeks to deliver through conventional means." She moved closer, checking the neural interface connections with hands that trembled slightly despite her apparent confidence. "I need you to understand something else," she said quietly. "I'm not Zephyrian." The statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not Zephyrian, which meant shapeshifter, Zara continued, apparently reading his expression. "Kethlon species. We can mimic other forms for extended periods if we're careful about it. I've been in this body for 6 years, working my way up through their military structure. A shapeshifter. That explained the successful infiltration, the deep cover operation, the ability to pass every security screening the Empire could devise. The Keflon were rare, their natural abilities making them perfect for intelligence work, but their small population limiting their strategic impact. My people have been allied with humanity since the early days of the war, Zara explained. We've maintained deep cover assets throughout the Empire, gathering intelligence, and looking for opportunities to strike back. She finished her equipment setup and moved back to the control console, her voice returning to normal volume as she deactivated the privacy field. Memory extraction will begin in 60 seconds, she announced for the benefit of the monitoring systems. Prisoners should prepare for neural interface activation. As the countdown proceeded, Marcus felt a strange mixture of hope and terror building in his chest. Hope that rescue might actually be possible. Terror at what the memory upload process might do to his already suppressed mind. Beginning extraction sequence, Zara announced. The neural interface came alive with a sensation like lightning moving through his brain. Marcus felt his consciousness expanding suddenly, flooded with information that arrived too fast for conscious processing, but somehow embedded itself in his memory anyway. Star charts showing hidden routes through Zephyrian space. Communication frequencies for resistance cells scattered across dozens of worlds. Safe house locations, weapons caches, extraction points. Names and faces of allies he'd never met, but who'd been working toward this moment for years. And something else. A timeline. Operation Prometheus, they were calling it. A coordinated strike designed not just to rescue one prisoner, but to deliver a blow that would shake the Empire's confidence in their own security. Through the neural interface, Marcus saw fleet dispositions and battle plans. Human ships moving into position, supported by Keflon infiltration teams and allied species who'd grown tired of Zephyrian domination. A massive operation, months in the planning, all centered around getting him out. But also around what would happen after they got him out. The Reaper's return wouldn't just be a symbolic victory. It would be the signal for a coordinated uprising across human space, timed to coincide with the most audacious rescue operation in the history of the war. Extraction complete, Zara announced as the neural interface powered down. Intelligence harvest was successful. Marcus slumped in his chair, genuinely exhausted by the information upload. His head felt stuffed with cotton and lightning, new memories sitting uneasily alongside old ones. But beneath the confusion, he felt something he hadn't experienced in nearly 4 years. Purpose. The prisoner will need several hours to recover from the neural stress, Zara said, making notes on her datapad. I recommend minimal interaction until the next scheduled session. As she prepared to leave, she passed close to Marcus one final time. Close enough to whisper words that only he could hear. 72 hours, she said quietly. Be ready. Then, she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with a head full of stolen intelligence, and the knowledge that the war he'd thought was ending was actually about to begin again. The neural suppressor hummed against his skull, working frantically to dampen the hope and determination that threatened to break through its chemical restraints. It was failing. Marcus Kane, the Reaper, was coming back to life. And when he did, the Zephyrian Empire was going to remember exactly why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The countdown had begun. 72 hours until Operation Prometheus. 72 hours until the harvest started again. Hour 57. Marcus Kane sat motionless in his cell, every muscle fiber controlled and ready, while his mind raced through the intelligence Zara had uploaded 3 days ago. The information had settled into his consciousness like pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place, revealing the true scope of what was coming. Operation Prometheus wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a declaration of war. The neural suppressor still hummed against his skull, but something had changed during the memory upload. Either the process had caused some kind of feedback in the device, or Zara had done something to it while he was connected to the extraction apparatus. Whatever the cause, Marcus could feel cracks in the suppressor's control, tiny gaps where his natural emotional responses bled through the chemical dampening. For the first time in almost 4 years, he could feel anger. It started as a small warmth in his chest, barely noticeable beneath the suppressor's influence. But as the hours passed, the warmth grew into heat, and the heat grew into a flame that no amount of neural interference could completely extinguish. They had tried to break him, tried to turn him into a symbol of defeat, a cautionary tale about the futility of resistance. Instead, they had given him exactly what he needed: time to heal, intelligence about their weaknesses, and a shapeshifter ally positioned at the heart of their operation. The morning routine proceeded normally. Nutrition paste at 0630. Guard inspection at 0800. Psychological conditioning session at 0900, where Marcus dutifully watched more fabricated intelligence about human defeats while cataloging every detail of the room's layout and security protocols. Zara appeared at 1100 for what the schedule called Enhanced Interrogation Follow-Up. She brought the neural interface equipment again, setting it up with the same professional efficiency she'd shown before. Today we'll be probing deeper into strategic intelligence, she announced for the monitoring systems. Fleet dispositions, command structures, operational planning. As she activated the privacy field, her demeanor shifted into the focused intensity Marcus had come to recognize as her true self rather than her Zephyrian persona. 15 hours, she whispered. Are you ready? Marcus tried to nod and found that he could. Another sign that the suppressor's control was weakening. Systems, all in place, Zara confirmed quietly. The suppressor will experience a malfunction at exactly 0200 tomorrow. You'll have approximately 17 minutes of full motor and vocal function before backup systems engage. 17 minutes. It would have to be enough. Opposition, 12 guards on the night shift, plus automated defenses. The facility's main security hub is 3 levels up, accessible through maintenance shafts. If you can reach it, I can disable their communications and lockdown protocols. Marcus finished. The uploaded intelligence had included detailed technical specifications for Zephyrian security systems. Zara moved to the neural interface controls, her movements covering her continued whispered briefing. Extraction teams will be in position by 0130. Human strike forces, Keflon infiltrators, and some allies you haven't met yet. But they can't reach you until you clear a path from the inside. Understood. Marcus paused, considering what came next. After extraction, the real operation begins. Zara's pale eyes burned with anticipation. Your rescue is just the opening move. While the Empire scrambles to understand how we breached their most secure facility, coordinated strikes will hit military installations across 17 systems. Your return becomes the signal for a general uprising. The scope of it was breathtaking. Months of preparation, countless assets positioned for a single coordinated blow that would catch the Zephyrians completely off guard. Beginning enhanced interrogation, Zara announced at normal volume, activating the neural interface. This time, instead of uploading information, the process seemed designed to showcase her control over the prisoner. Marcus writhed convincingly in his restraints as Zara pretended to extract strategic intelligence from his suppressed memories. To any observer, it would look like a successful interrogation of the most valuable prisoner in the galaxy. In reality, they were synchronized swimmers performing an elaborate deception. Resistance fleet strength appears limited, Zara said aloud, reading from fabricated data that would make the monitoring personnel believe they were gaining crucial intelligence. Primary staging areas located in the Outer Rim territories. Meanwhile, through the neural link, she fed Marcus final operational details. Guard rotation schedules, security camera blind spots, the exact location of the facility's power distribution center, and one piece of information that changed everything. The High Council is meeting here tomorrow, she whispered through the neural link. Emergency session to discuss your interrogation results. Every major decision maker in the Empire will be in the same facility where we're breaking you out. Marcus felt the implications cascade through his mind like dominoes falling. If they could reach the High Council during the escape, it's an opportunity, Zara continued, but also a trap. Security will be tripled. Any mistake means not just mission failure, but the deaths of everyone involved in the rescue. Through the neural link, Marcus felt her uncertainty. The original plan had been surgical. Get in, extract the prisoner, get out. But the presence of the High Council turned it into something much more ambitious and much more dangerous. The decision was his to make. Marcus thought about the fabricated intelligence they'd shown him. The staged defeats, the false surrenders, the propaganda designed to convince him that humanity had given up. Even knowing it was fake, the images had carried emotional weight. How many real defeats had there been while he was imprisoned? How many people had died because the Reaper wasn't there to tip the balance? How much longer would this war continue if they settled for a simple rescue instead of striking at the heart of enemy leadership? Through the neural link, Marcus sent his decision back to Zara. Take the shot. Her eyes widened slightly, the only external sign of her surprise. Then, her expression hardened into something that looked very much like the Reaper's own determination. Interrogation complete, she announced, powering down the neural interface. Intelligence harvest exceeded expectations. As she prepared to leave, Zara made one final adjustment to the neural suppressor's programming. To any observer, it would look like routine maintenance. In reality, she was setting the timer that would give Marcus his 17 minutes of freedom. Prisoner requires rest period for neural recovery, she said formally. Next session scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. By 0800 tomorrow, if everything went according to plan, the facility would be a smoking crater and the High Council of the Zephyrian Empire would be dead or captured. But first, Marcus had to survive the next 15 hours. As the facility settled into its evening routine, he began the mental preparation that had once made him the most feared soldier in human space. Muscle memory exercises performed in absolute stillness. Tactical scenarios rehearsed in the privacy of his own mind. The slow, careful cultivation of controlled fury that would fuel him when the moment came. The neural suppressor hummed against his skull, but its voice was growing weaker. Whatever Zara had done during the interrogation sessions was having a cumulative effect, eroding the device's control over his nervous system. Marcus could feel himself returning, piece by piece, memory by memory. At 2,300 hours, the facility's lights dimmed to night cycle settings. Guard rotations shifted to skeleton crews. Most of the administrative personnel went off duty, leaving only essential security and monitoring staff. At midnight, Marcus heard the distant rumble of ships entering orbit. To anyone listening casually, it would sound like routine traffic, supply vessels, courier ships, the normal flow of commerce around a core world. But Marcus's enhanced hearing, sharpened by years of special operations training, caught the subtle differences in engine harmonics that suggested military vessels running in stealth configuration. The extraction fleet was in position. At 0130, the facility's environmental systems registered a minor atmospheric disturbance, the kind of sensor ghost that might indicate incoming weather or solar radiation fluctuations. Marcus knew better. Keflon infiltrators had a distinctive electromagnetic signature when they shifted forms. The facility was being surrounded by shapeshifters who could assume the appearance of guards, maintenance staff, or emergency responders. At 0200 exactly, the neural suppressor went silent. The absence of its constant hum was like stepping out of a soundproofed room into open air. Sensation flooded back into Marcus's nervous system. The ache in his joints from years of restraint, the metallic taste of suppressor chemicals in his mouth, the sharp clarity of unmediated thought. But, most of all, he felt the return of something the Zephyrians had tried to kill: rage. Pure, focused, controlled rage that had been building pressure behind the suppressor's barriers for almost 4 years. It hit his system like a drug, sharpening his reflexes and flooding his muscles with strength he'd forgotten he possessed. Marcus Kane rose from his cot like a resurrection. The restraints that had held him for so long were designed to contain a suppressed, weakened prisoner. They had never been tested against the Reaper at full capacity. The first chain snapped with a sound like gunfire. The second followed a heartbeat later. By the time the facility's alarm started screaming, Marcus was already moving. The cell door had been built to contain a human. The thing that emerged from Cell 7 Alpha was something else entirely. 4 years of suppressed violence given form, the accumulated fury of every fallen comrade, and conquered world focused into a weapon of surgical precision. The first guard died before he understood what was happening. The second managed to draw his weapon before Marcus broke his neck. The third actually got a shot off, a plasma bolt that seared the air where the Reaper had been standing a microsecond earlier. None of it mattered. They had tried to cage death itself, and death had finally remembered how to hunt. As Marcus moved through the facility's corridors like a force of nature, he could hear the sounds of coordinated assault from multiple directions. Explosions, weapons fire, the distinctive whine of Kevlar energy weapons cutting through defensive barriers. Operation Prometheus had begun, and somewhere in the facility's upper levels, the High Council of the Zephyrian Empire was about to discover that some legends refused to die quietly in chains. The Reaper was free, and the harvest was just beginning. The security hub died in 17 seconds. Marcus Kane moved through the facility's maintenance shafts like liquid death, the uploaded facility schematics guiding him past automated defenses and security checkpoints. For years of suppressed muscle memory had returned with vengeance, every step perfectly controlled despite the rage burning in his chest. The guards never saw him coming. The Reaper dropped through a ceiling vent into the security center's main monitoring station, landing silently among banks of displays showing facility status and surveillance feeds. 3 Zephyrian technicians looked up from their consoles, just long enough to register shock before Marcus ended their capacity for further observation. His hands flew across the control systems, muscle memory from dozens of similar operations guiding him through alien interface protocols. Lockdown barriers retracted throughout the facility. Communications arrays went offline. Automated defense turrets switched from facility protection to standby mode. In 90 seconds, the most secure prison in the Zephyrian Empire had become a killing field with no way to call for help. Marcus activated the facility's internal communications system, his voice carrying to every speaker in the complex for the first time in almost 4 years. "This is Colonel Marcus Kane, Terran Defense Forces," he said, each word weighted with 4 years of accumulated fury. "To any Zephyrian personnel still alive in this facility, you have exactly 60 seconds to surrender before I come for you personally." The words echoed through corridors where explosions and weapons fire provided a percussion soundtrack to his declaration. Through the security feeds, Marcus could see insertion teams moving through the facility with military precision. Human special forces in powered armor, Kevlar shapeshifters appearing as Zephyrian guards to confuse defenders, and others he didn't recognize but who moved with the fluid coordination of elite soldiers. Operation Prometheus was unfolding exactly as planned, except for one problem. The High Council chambers were sealed behind emergency protocols that even his override codes couldn't breach. Reinforced barriers designed to protect the Empire's leadership during planetary bombardment had turned the upper levels into an impregnable fortress. Marcus studied the security feeds showing the sealed council chambers. 12 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, trapped in what they thought was safety, but what might actually be their tomb. He could wait for the assault teams to bring heavy demolition equipment, but that would take time they might not have. Or he could get creative. The facility's main power core was 3 levels down, a fusion reactor that provided energy for the entire complex. According to the uploaded schematics, it was protected by multiple redundant safety systems designed to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophic overload that would. Marcus smiled for the first time in 4 years. It wasn't a pleasant expression. He moved through the facility like a ghost of vengeance, past evacuation routes where Zephyrian personnel fled in panic and battle zones where the assault teams systematically eliminated resistance. The uploaded intelligence had prepared him for this moment. Every detail of the facility's layout burned into his memory during those careful interrogation sessions with Zara. The power core chamber was a cathedral of technology, its central fusion reactor surrounded by monitoring stations and control systems that maintained the delicate balance between controlled energy and catastrophic explosion. Emergency lighting bathed everything in harsh red shadows that made Marcus look like something summoned from humanity's darkest legends. Which, in many ways, he was. The reactor's safety systems were sophisticated but not impregnable, especially when attacked by someone who understood their design principles. Marcus began the careful process of disabling safeguards, his movements precise despite the adrenaline flooding his system. This wasn't about crew destruction, but surgical sabotage, creating a controlled overload that would breach the council chambers without destroying the entire facility. As he worked, his enhanced hearing caught approaching footsteps. Multiple individuals, moving with the careful coordination of a tactical team. Marcus drew the plasma rifle he'd taken from a dead guard and positioned himself behind a control console, ready for another firefight. Marcus! The voice was familiar, speaking English with only a trace of alien accent. Zara emerged from the chamber's entrance, but she no longer looked Zephyrian. Her true Keflon form was taller and more angular, with skin that shifted between colors like liquid metal and eyes that held depths no humanoid species possessed. Behind her came a mixed squad of humans and aliens Marcus didn't recognize. "Thought you might need backup," she said, gesturing toward the reactor controls. "That's a delicate operation for one person." "I've got it handled," Marcus replied, his voice rough from years of disuse, but carrying the authority that had once commanded fleets. "I know you do," Zara said quietly, "but you don't have to do it alone anymore." The words hit Marcus harder than enemy fire ever had. For 4 years, he'd been alone with his chains and his silence and his slowly dying hope. The isolation had been worse than the physical imprisonment, the knowledge that he fought a solitary battle against an empire that wanted to break his spirit. But he wasn't alone anymore. As Marcus continued his work on the reactor controls, the assault team fanned out through the chamber, establishing security and preparing for what came next. Human soldiers moved with the controlled aggression he remembered from his own commands. Alien allies demonstrated technologies and capabilities that spoke of a resistance network far more sophisticated than the Zephyrians had ever suspected. Status report, Marcus said as he initiated the final sequence that would turn the reactor into a precision explosive device. "Facility secured," reported one of the human soldiers, a woman whose insignia marked her as a major in the reformed Terran Defense Forces. "All Zephyrian personnel neutralized or surrendered. Extraction routes are clear." "Council chamber status?" "Still sealed," Zara replied, checking her instruments. "Emergency barriers are holding, but they won't survive what you're about to do to their power source." Marcus made the final adjustment to the reactor's containment systems. In approximately 4 minutes, the fusion core would undergo a controlled breach that would channel most of its energy upward through the facility's superstructure. The blast would be sufficient to crack the emergency barriers while leaving the rest of the facility mostly intact. Mostly. "Evacuation protocol," Marcus ordered. "All personnel to minimum safe distance." As the team began withdrawing from the reactor chamber, Zara lingered beside him. In her true form, she seemed both alien and familiar, a being who had risked everything to make this moment possible. "You know, this might kill them," she said quietly. "The council members, if the blast doesn't breach cleanly." "I know," Marcus replied. "But if we let them escape, how many more humans die? How many more worlds fall under their rule?" It was the calculation every soldier learned to make. Immediate violence to prevent greater suffering later. The arithmetic of war, written in blood and measured in the lives that would or wouldn't be saved by decisive action. Besides, Marcus added, checking his chronometer, they had 4 years to consider the consequences of their choices. This is just the bill coming due. They withdrew to the facility's outer perimeter as the countdown entered its final phase. Through the assembled assault teams, Marcus could see the true scope of Operation Prometheus. Dozens of species represented, unified by shared opposition to Zephyrian domination. Humans working alongside beings he'd never encountered before, all coordinated by intelligence networks that had been building toward this moment for years. The reactor breach lit up the mountain like a small star being born. The explosion raced upward through the facility's levels, channeled by structural modifications that had been built into the complex decades earlier. Emergency barriers that had seemed impregnable cracked like eggshells under the precisely directed fury of a controlled fusion overload. When the light faded and the debris settled, there was a hole in the mountainside where the council chambers had been. Marcus led the search teams into the wreckage personally. They found the High Council members scattered throughout the destroyed chamber, most dead from the blast, a few clinging to life despite massive injuries. Among them was Counselor Theklar, the ancient Zephyrian who had overseen Marcus's imprisonment. The old counselor's ice-blue eyes focused on Marcus with obvious effort. "The famous Reaper," he whispered, pale blood trickling from his mouth. "Did you enjoy our hospitality?" Marcus knelt beside him, close enough that his words would carry despite the counselor's failing hearing. "You should have killed me when you had the chance. We tried to break you instead," Theklar replied. "Worst mistake." "Yes," Marcus said simply. "It was." The counselor died with those words echoing in his mind. The aftermath moved with the efficiency of a well-planned operation. Intelligence teams extracted data from the facility's servers, while demolition specialists prepared charges to destroy anything they couldn't carry. Medical teams treated the wounded, while communication specialists coordinated with resistance cells across dozens of systems. The real war was just beginning. As they prepared for extraction, Marcus found himself standing on the facility's ruined upper levels, looking out over the lights of Kethmoran Prime. Somewhere in those lights, millions of beings were going about their lives unaware that the balance of galactic power had shifted in the last few hours. Zara approached him, having resumed her Zephyrian appearance for operational security. "Extraction ships are incoming," she reported. "We'll be off-world in 20 minutes. Marcus nodded, but didn't turn away from the view. "How many other worlds have you infiltrated?" "Enough," Zara replied. "The Kethlan have been playing a very long game, Marcus. Your rescue was just one piece of a much larger strategy. And now? Now we find out if 4 years of planning can overcome 4 centuries of Zephyrian dominance." Zara paused, studying his profile in the dim light. "Are you ready for what comes next?" This was the easy part. Marcus finally turned to look at her, and in his eyes Zara saw something that made her species' shape-shifting abilities seem trivial by comparison. 4 years of imprisonment hadn't broken Marcus Kane. It had refined him into something purer and more focused than he'd been before. "I've been ready for 4 years," he said quietly. "The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what happens when you let the Reaper off his chain." The extraction ships arrived exactly on schedule, sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls. As they lifted off from the ruined facility, Marcus could see other ships rising from locations across the planet's surface. Kethlan infiltrators who had maintained their cover for years, human intelligence assets, allied species operatives, all of them abandoning their positions now that Operation Prometheus had succeeded. Behind them, emergency responders were arriving at the facility to find nothing but wreckage and the bodies of the most powerful government in the galaxy. Ahead of them lay a war that would determine whether the stars belonged to those who sought to dominate or those who refused to surrender. Marcus Kane settled back in his seat as the ship entered hyperspace, feeling truly free for the first time in almost 4 years. The neural suppressor was gone, cut away by medical teams during the extraction. His voice had returned completely, no longer filtered through alien technology designed to break his will. But, most importantly, he had purpose again. The Zephyrian Empire had made the mistake of trying to cage death itself. Now death was loose among them, and Marcus intended to remind the galaxy exactly why humans were the most dangerous species among the stars. The Reaper had returned, and the harvest was just beginning.